Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our dear Chi community. We are so excited to have you with us today for this beautiful free webinar sponsored by the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. My name is Dr. Shamini Jan. I am so excited to see all of you jumping in on the chat for this really amazing discussion on biofields and the edge of biofield science that we're going to have today. Do throw in where you are in the chat so that our beautiful guests can see where all you are hailing from. It's always such a joy to see where you're all coming from. Hello, Ellen. You are in New York City. Lovely. Lovely. Sweden, Portugal. Lovely. Topanga, Ireland, Italy, Los Angeles, Colombia, Tucson. My goodness, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Idaho, UK. Cleveland, California. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that so many of you joined from Europe. For your Friday night wisdom. It's amazing. I love that we're able to really connect like this in real time and space. And wow, I mean, what a lucky community we are to have such incredible leaders in biofield science able to devote their time and energy and their wisdom to us on these free webinars. I want to thank each of you that have already joined as a Chi contributor that helps us to be able to produce these webinars for our dear community. Many of you asked this question in the very beginning, so I'm just going to tell you now so that we can just lay it to rest. There will be a recording of this webinar available for you to watch and share later. And if you registered for this webinar or your friend registered for the webinar, they will get a link to the recording. And we do our best to share this freely over the entire weekend so that you can rewatch and say, oh, I want to get back to that nugget that I heard earlier. And we do want to ask you to consider joining us as a contributor for a beautiful tax-deductible donation of $108 a year, the magical 108, or $9 a month, about the cost of a green juice, or maybe at this point, a cost of a cup of coffee, the way inflation is going, but much more nutritious. And when you do that, you will receive this webinar and all webinars that we've produced, over 100 of them in perpetuity, a beautiful bank, free monthly meditations, latest science updates, and more. We're really excited to share with you what we're going to have as additional beautiful gifts for our contributor community coming up very soon. We are really building and architecting a community-based platform for you so that we can move from one to many to many to many. And your donations and your support is what will make it possible. So there's my pitch. Jason will put in the chat both our donate links and our join links. And we hope that you will join the many hundred of people that are already Chi contributors. Thank you again for your support, because without you, we could not do this. Now, I am so excited to introduce our guest today, an advisor to the Consciousness and Healing Initiative. He serves on our Scientific Advisory Council. He is a pioneer in the realm of biofield science and comes to it from many different facets, including pain management and psychiatry. Dr. Eric, or Rick Leskowitz, recently retired after serving as a consultant psychiatrist for over 25 years with the pain management program at Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital in Boston, where he also founded the Integrative Medicine Task Force. He holds an appointment at Harvard Medical School and has studied energy healing, meditation, and hypnosis for over 40 years, presenting workshops nationally and internationally on the integration of subtle energy techniques and theories, along with the allopathic medical model. He has written widely for medical and lay audiences, with over 50 articles being published in leading scientific journals. He's also edited 3 textbooks, and his documentary film about group energies and sports, The Joy of Socks, Weird Science, and the Power of Intention, was broadcast on PBS stations nationwide in the fall of 2012. His latest book, which I'm hoping we're going to be learning about too, The Mystery of Life Energy, is his latest. We'll put a link in the chat to that so you can learn more. Rick, thank you so much for taking time to spend with us and share some of your beautiful insights and research over these years in biofield science.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this. It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be a blast. It's going to be a blast. So you're a psychiatrist, and you've obviously done work in pain management for many, many, many years. You come from, as many of us do, a mainstream upbringing in many ways. What got you into biofield science?
Well, it was a long and winding road, as somebody once said. I grew up in a conventional family where mainstream science was the religion that we practiced. We were sort of cultural Jews, but not really observant. My dad was a research scientist in the early days of immunology, and he would look at things in the microscope, and that was the coolest thing ever. So I thought that was where you sought an understanding of the nature of reality. And I was good at science and math, so I went that track in high school and college, pre-med in college. But I went to college in the late 60s and early 70s where there was a spirit of rebellion, the anti-war movement, but it was also sort of question authority at all different levels, including, conceptual levels. I didn't think of it at the time, but there was more to the world than what we were learning. Fortunately, I took some time off before going to medical school and did some travel around the world. I met my wife in a kibbutz in Israel. We traveled overland to India, and we saw different cultures do things very, very differently, including, sticking a needle into you to relieve pain and things that made no sense from the mainstream point of view. So I went back to medical school and got disappointed very quickly because I learned a new vocabulary word, and that was idiopathic. It was a very commonly used word to describe different diseases. It sounds impressive, but it really means we don't know what's going on. So it was, that was sort of in a nutshell the problem with medicine. They had very impressive sounding labels, but they really didn't get the key, what was going on beneath it. Psychiatry seemed like the way to go because mind and body was the connection was being recognized, and stress management and relaxation response and things like that. Even meditate. I learned how to meditate just before starting medical school, and that was very far out back then. So things have changed since then. So I was doing, those kind of approaches, working in the VA system. A friend of mine said, "Would you like to go to a lecture on energy healing?" And my gut reaction was, "Come on, you got to be kidding." But I trusted Richard's judgment, so I went along, and that was really a game changer for me because it was a lecture by a woman from Los Angeles who did energy healing work in conjunction with the doctors in the Los Angeles area. So she spoke the medical language and the energy language. That was Reverend Rosalind Bruyere, who you are very familiar with. And within 5 minutes, I knew that this lady could make the two worlds intersect in a way that no one had ever done before. She back then she would come to Massachusetts a couple of times a year for 5-day intensives, and I went for 5, 6, 7 years, I forget how many, and really got immersed in that world of energy, which was totally new to me. I have to admit, there was a core group of about 40 or 50 of us. And in some ways, I was the dumbest kid in the class because I couldn't feel energies. I was so up here, from my medical training that it took me a long time to sort of descend down into it and begin to sense what was going on. But
Wow.
things were never the same after that.
I can so resonate with that because I had a very similar experience with Rosalind, who, as you know, I went on to study with for many years. And it still teaches you guys. She's an incredible leading light in healing in so many ways. But when she was teaching at Andy Weil's program for the Center for Integrative Medicine Fellows, we were doing a research study with Dr. Gary Schwartz at that time, who I was working with. And I convinced Gary that in order for me to really study this, I needed to go to the workshop and learn about it, firsthand, because I was just obviously very curious. And I remember feeling like the dumbest person in that room because I was like, what are you talking about? I'd had Reiki before and other things, but the way Rosalind runs energy, as you know, it's very palpable. So she took my hand,
Yeah,
and ran the energy. And I was like, what is this? So how
yeah.
neat. I didn't know about that story. I didn't know that she was your introduction
Oh
to
yeah, she was
energy.
my primary teacher. There's so many resources that she had access to and taught us about. But you're right, feeling the energy, I think, is more powerful than reading a double-blind, randomized, controlled study. As far as waking people up to this whole other dimension, and so that's what I've in my research I've tried to balance out the numbers with the images and the visceral sensations that are part of it. So yeah, I worked in the VA for a while and then switched over to Spalding in pain management. And initially that was basically mind body things like, relaxation and biofeedback, things like that, which were at the time very revolutionary because we were teaching self-management rather than prescribing pills. But I began to integrate in some of these energy-based treatments, like the part of it was therapeutic touch, which I'll talk about in a minute. Some of it was these acupressure tapping techniques, EFT, or emotional freedom techniques. Those were really paradigm shifting for me as well. What I ended up focusing on, because it was the most interesting in a way, I hope it doesn't sound too weird, but the most fascinating form of chronic pain I found was what happens after an amputation. And people very commonly have the sensation that the limb is still there, but not quite as often, maybe half the time, it's very painful. And that sort of phantom limb pain, as it's called, doesn't respond well to the usual medications or injections or what have you. So that was a challenge for us. And many patients did well just with the mind body approach, but there were always some that didn't respond. So one of the fellows there, I know, a better way to illustrate this is, let me show you um, the model of what the Bible in medical school was Gray's Anatomy, which I hope you can see on the screen now. And the
Mhm.
idea was that if you knew the muscles and bones and the cells and the molecules and the neurotransmitters and something was out of place, you'd put it all together and everything would work magically again. That was the promise of it, but it didn't always work out that way. Uh, Unfortunate, and then fortunately, there's been a revised edition of Gray's Anatomy. It's by Alex Gray, who's actually no relation to the other Gray. So it's just a bad pun, but the
Different
image,
Grey's Anatomy altogether, yes.
yeah, the image is an important one because this shows there are muscles and bones and blood vessels, but there's also all this glowing stuff. And this is probably a fairly familiar image, but it shows you the energy centers, the pathways, the meridians, the acupoints, and the field itself. So this, I think, is the more accurate description of what a human being is. There are even layers to the field, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But the idea is that there's a very complex structure. It's called subtle anatomy, to contrast it with the gross anatomy of dissection and physical anatomy in medical school. In medical school, the idea was the anatomy would help you to explain the physiology or how things worked. And it's the same in the energy level. There's a subtle anatomy that helps to run the energy physiology. And as I was starting to say, that the phantom pain was a really important way of coming to understand that. So let me go back to showing you that if you remember from that diagram, you don't enter your skin, you extend quite a ways out. And almost everybody can feel that. It's not some esoteric skill. Some people are better at it than others, and some people, like me, required a lot of training before they caught on. But you can do this here at home. The idea is put your hands facing each other, but not touching, starting a couple of feet apart, and gradually bringing them closer without touching and further apart. It actually helps to close your eyes to tune into whatever you might be sensing in that empty space. People often describe it as a tingling or a pressure, usually when they're, like a foot apart, something like that. The idea is that this is not a hallucination. It's another sense that you have. It's not one of the five physical senses, but it's a electrical sense or magnetic sense. And it can be used to detect that field around the body. There's a technique called therapeutic touch that smooths out this energy field around people. And I was using that in some of my patients. I had one phantom limb patient who was missing a leg who didn't respond to the usual approaches. So, chronic pain patients are willing to try anything. So I had him lie down on the table and I did this sort of assessment, feeling that pressure over his whole body. And for some reason, I kept going over his missing leg without any particular agenda. It was more force of habit. And then I realized I could feel that same pressure sensation over his missing leg that I felt over the rest of his body. And he opened his eyes and said, "What are you doing, doc?" Because he could feel me touching his phantom leg.
So that was your foray into this. So this is really important because I know that you have been a big proponent of exploring phantom limb pain with biofield healing approaches and using that as a method for really exploring biofield from a scientific point of view. And
Yeah,
there are many practitioners that have reported this, that they work with phantom limb and that they can feel the leg that physically isn't there because they can feel the energy around it.
yeah.
So you really started this too with that firsthand experience with a patient.
Yeah, that made all the difference in the world because you couldn't explain it by the medical model is it has to do with the brain function and they call it maladaptive neuroplasticity, which is another fabulous sounding word, but it really doesn't explain
Well,
anything.
yeah, it means your wiring is funky, right? Like,
Yeah,
what a
yeah.
thing to say. Yeah.
And your wiring does change with some of these approaches, but it's secondary, it's not causal. So anyway, with this guy, I could feel it, he could feel it. There was something out there in space that shouldn't have been there. And it really resonated with some of the studies that were done, well, must be like 40, 50 years ago with what's called Kirlian photography,
Mhm.
and which images can be made of the energy field surrounding thin objects, because that's how the camera works. Let me just show you this picture. This is the cover of a book that was very,
Oh, this was my first foray into
yeah,
medicine was this book, and I have the same book, same cover, and it beat up just like that from reading it over and over
that's
and over
it's been read many times. So you can see that there's a corona around the edge of it. The question was, what would happen? What would you predict would happen if you cut off the bottom half of that leaf? Most people say, well, the corona will just follow the contour of the leaf because somehow or other the leaf is emanating this energy and it's like a light bulb glowing or something like that. But it turns out that's not the case, that the corona persists even when there's no leaf structure there. There's no chlorophyll or water or whatever. And so it's a perfect
that
analogy, and it's called the
that isn't
fan.
100% demonstrated all the time, though, right? Like that, there have been some reports of that, and it also hasn't been fully replicated, if I understand correctly.
That is
Yeah.
correct. It's a very striking finding, and you'd think it would be easy to replicate. But I'm actually working with a group of biophysics people to try and do that. Some of some of them, like
Oh yeah, we started that project at Chi many years ago, and so I'm aware of it, and I'm glad that it's ongoing. But it seems a bit of like chasing the phantom leaf that's going on there, and so this is, I think, part of the edge of biofield science. And there's a lot we could talk about this in terms of replicability of things that we see in the
yeah,
data, because
and,
certainly there have been reports of things like phantom leaves, but they're not always replicated, right?
right.
Which is interesting. But now back to the phantom pain, because I want to really make sure that we're exploring what we know about phantom limb pain. And so there are a couple of questions that get into that from the work that you have done and the work that you're aware of. The first question is, are biofield therapies actually helpful for phantom limb pain? Have there been research studies that demonstrate their efficacy, or those controlled research studies? Or what do we know about whether biofield healing approaches or other holistic healing approaches have been helpful for phantom limb pain?
Well, it's still early in the research trajectory, and so far it's mostly case reports and accumulated case studies. Um, for a variety of institutional reasons, I was not able to put together an organized research program at Spalding, even though we did the rehab for the people who were injured in the Boston Marathon bombing, and many of whom had phantom pain, but we couldn't quite work it out. So it's still very preliminary, but the impression is that, at least in my experience, things like therapeutic touch can smooth out the energy. The fellow that I was talking about, he could feel the energy draining out his foot, the pain draining out his foot, and he asked me to stop. He did not want to eliminate the pain because then it would feel like he doesn't have a leg. So the
Interesting.
pain actually served an important psychological function for him to help him feel at some level intact. So not everybody is ready to heal in the way that we, the clinicians, think is best. So that's worked. I've used tapping a lot, and it turns out that many amputees never had a chance to deal with the psychological or emotional trauma of
Mhm.
amputation, whether it's the automobile accident that caused it, or one case was the woman's main frustration in life was dealing with the insurance companies to try and get authorization for her I mean, it's terrible, but that was her major trauma. And once we released that, her phantom pain dissipated. So I proposed a model, an energy trauma model for phantom limb pain that I think will hold up, but it's very hard to get the all the pieces in place. And that team that I mentioned, we're looking for funding. You know, Beverly Rubik's in it, Gaetan Chevalier's in it, John Hubacher, who did the original study. So these are the best people to be doing it, but it's taken a while for everything to fall into place. But I think that's really going to flip things inside out because it will show that the biofield is primary, and in a way the physical body forms around the biofield. It's just like the demonstration that people probably did in seventh grade where you sprinkle iron filings on a piece of paper and have a bar magnet underneath it, and the filings line up in this really beautiful geometric pattern that's invisible to the naked eye. I think
Mm.
the cells of the body are like the iron filings, and they line up according to these invisible meridians and chakras. If you sweep away some of the iron filings or, chop off the limb, the energy field is still there and it can still transmit sensation and information. It's just not visible to the naked eye. So whether it's Kirlian photography or what, we've got to come up with something because that will be really an eye opener.
Interesting. Yeah, I agree. And would so much to explore here. And I want to remind folks, there's a beautiful question that's actually just popped up in the Q&A box. We usually wait till the end, but since this one is really related to our discussion at the moment, and I want to invite all of you who are joining us on Zoom, if you have a question for Rick, please pop it into the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen here on Zoom. If you put it in chat, I won't see it, but if you put it in Q&A, we will leave time at the end for questions too, but it's also possible that if your question is very related to the topic at hand, and I see it, I'll bring it out right now, like I'm going to with this person's question. If the energy is still there for a phantom limb, will it one day be possible to have that limb regenerate?
Yeah, great question. And then I think that's, one or two steps down the road. That, as you know, there are some organisms that can regenerate. Salamanders is the best known. But Robert Becker, who's an orthopedic surgeon who did some of the early work on magnetic fields around the physical body, he was able to stimulate regeneration in partial regeneration in rats by altering the electromagnetic field through machinery around them. So if you can alter that, the EMFs appropriately, it can stimulate cells to regrow. The next step would be, can energy healing techniques do the same thing? And I'm 100% sure it's possible. It just hasn't yet been demonstrated. But that's the rehab medicine of the future.
Yeah. There is so much to explore here. It's a little disappointing to hear that there aren't real studies that are being conducted, rigorous studies that are being conducted either for the relief and the experience. Let's just say first the experience of phantom limb pain and its relationship to biofield sensing and awareness. Then the therapeutics from, more of the biofield perspective, and the impact that a biofield therapy might have on reducing the pain and kind of the things related to the pain, like you said, traumatic experience. And then finally, our understanding of the field itself and, whether there are abilities to potentially measure this in some way, like you said, with potentially the GDV or BioWell, and other types of devices. I don't know if people have looked at this with magnetoencephalography or magnetic, not necessarily with the brain, but also with the body, measuring magnetic potentials off of the body in phantom limb pain as a way of exploring the biofield.
No, these are all great ideas. It's been a bit challenging to get the conventional academic people are the ones who have access to the equipment, but they're
Mm.
also the ones whose, focus is much narrower. I had some fMRI proposals to study what happens when you treat phantom pain through these energy techniques, and
Yeah.
it got
But
shut down twice. The first time it got shut down because the critique was, how could this possibly work? You've got to demonstrate the mechanism. So then I resubmitted it, focusing on dismantling the impact. And then they said, wait a minute, you got to first show that there's a proof of concept before you can dismantle it. So it was like a total catch 22. So I
yes, as we
I did
know.
I didn't have the oomph to pursue that, but somebody will. Somebody will.
Yeah, it's definitely a really key area for investigation, and I can feel and see your ongoing passion and the work that you have done in phantom limb pain and kind of bringing to awareness. This is an opportunity for us to understand the biofield and have it actually positively impact patients who are suffering. So I want to thank you so much for that work. And you mentioned, feeling the biofield, and you're speaking about this interaction really that you had with your patient, where you're, just feeling his field, and you feel his field, obviously. And I think most of us that are here on the webinar have a felt sense of the biofield. We can never get enough practice, so thank you again for leading us through practice recently. Um, but when you think about the interactions between biofields, those so-called edges and the space between them, how do you experience that? And where do you think the juice is scientifically in terms of exploring that interactiveness that, has so many of us lit up about the biofield, this
Yeah,
exploration, where do
yeah.
I begin and someone else ends?
Yeah, and I think that's part of what attracts people to the field in the first place is everybody's had experiences of group energies, for example, where you're with a lot of people who are on the same wavelength or the same vibe, and something palpable happens, and Alice, you're just excited or whatever. There's plenty of ways of dismissing it, but I think it's a biofield interaction that's happening because human beings are like tuning forks, and if one is vibrating at the frequency of joy, your joy tuning fork will start to be activated too. And that was sort of what was behind the sports project that I got involved with. I'm, a sports fan growing up in Boston, and our baseball team was terrible for many years until it finally won everything. It was actually 20 years ago now, but the group energy in New England was very palpable. I mean, for my patients, it was like an antidepressant, and the way the team interacted, the team chemistry was very noticeable. So my cousin, a filmmaker, and I put together this project where we interviewed players, interviewed fans, and did some demonstrations. Well, the coolest demo, I think, was with the heart math people, Roland McCready, where I was a guinea pig. I was blindfolded and had earplugs and was hooked up to one of their heart heart coherence monitors, and my baseline level of what they call heart coherence was measured. Roland later said that I was at the beginning I was incoherent, which I tried not to take personally, but I knew what he meant. Um, and then at some point, unbeknownst to me, four heart math practitioners came and sat behind me, and on a signal from Roland, they started to do their heart appreciation meditation. And within 10 seconds, my heart coherence just took off. So I was resonating to them without my conscious awareness. It wasn't through the five physical senses. I could feel something shifting inside. It was the same kind of energy sense that I would get when, doing energy work with Rosalind or people like that. So something was in this space between us. They were about maybe 3 feet behind me. And it's definitely, so this was published as a a case report, a demonstration report, but it could really be fine-tuned to figure out what actually was in that space between us. There are ways to screen out the electrical part of the field, the Faraday cage that you may have heard about. There's ways to screen out the magnetic part through what's called mu metal. Again, I haven't had the resources to pull it together, but I always put the idea out there and hope somebody listening can implement, because this one's very simple, actually. For people who want to look at it in more detail, the website to my book is the mysteryoflifeenergy.com, and then slash resources. The resource tab has a bunch of video clips. One of them is
Great.
one of them is the full documentary. If you're into sports, it's really fun to watch. But then there's a shorter one, about a 5-minute version, showing the study that we did at HeartMath, and it's as plain as day, and it's there for the taking. So I give permission to whoever wants to replicate it to have a go at it.
That's great. Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to share with us about that exploration of group energies?
Yeah, I mean, this was with people who were physically close to us, but there's also the sense of fan energy when you're in a stadium, and it's not just in a sports stadium. In a musical concert, in a meditation retreat, in a political rally. There's something in the air, and it's not just. So the question is that a figure of speech, or is there something in the air? So we did some measurements again at the Red Sox baseball field, Fenway Park, using the random number generator technique that was developed at Princeton, the PAIR lab, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, which is basically science fiction. It's basically that the mind can influence physical objects out there. In this case, it's a computer that generates a stream of, it flips a coin, ones and zeros, thousands of times a second. And usually it's, pretty close to 50-50. But in certain situations, there can be very big statistically significant fluctuations. And so we had this run during the course of a game. I couldn't see the output, but I was noticing what I thought were the subjectively most intense moments of the game. And then afterwards, we mapped it up, and I've forgotten the statistics now. It's something like 100,000 to 1 odds that the top 5 of my subjectives match the top 5 of the computer. So again, it's another demonstration that Roger Nelson and those people in the Global Consciousness Project have demonstrated that somehow or other there's a network that extends around the world and links us all, and we're all connected to it, and it has something to do with the Earth's magnetic field, but there's more to it than just that. So again, these are just fascinating areas to research, and it's happening. That's what this whole, it's so exciting to see this paradigm shift in process now, because stuff that I was going to say would have gotten me laughed off the stage 40 or 50 years ago did get me laughed off the stage in medical school, and I asked questions about it. It's now, valid
Yeah,
research.
I mean, and there are some things that we definitely know scientifically about group connection, group coherence. Our group actually I think it was 2019, it was right before COVID, the Consciousness and Healing Initiative took a delegation of scientists and doctors, and practitioners to several sacred sites in India. And I know we're going to have a discussion on sacred sites in a moment. But one of the things that we did was just, first of all, to explore cultural connection with those who are engaged in spiritual and meditative practices that are biofield based, like meditation. We see a question here on meditation and its connection with subtle energy. So we'll get into that. But we first just wanted to connect practitioners in the real natural setting, with our scientists to explore scientific collaborations. And they were very kind to let us collect some initial data at some of these places where we were. One of those places was at Auroville and at the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, which is in Pondicherry, India. And one of the advanced practitioners there was nice enough to let us take some measurements. And thanks to a nice support and gift from Muse headsets, we were able to take these portable headsets there and measure the initial brainwave activity. Now, the Muse headset just gets really the frontal leads there. We also were able to measure, of course, the heart rate. And we also took the Sputnik, which is as you might know, kind of an additional add-on to the BioWell, which honestly, I still don't have a clarity on exactly what it measures other than changes in the ionosphere. Keep trying to ask folks what that thing actually measures. But it was, sort of the energy in the room kind of measurement. And we were just curious to see whether we would see any fluctuations with the Sputnik during baseline or meditation, but also what would happen between practitioners. And we do have this in our report that we published on our website, a Consciousness and Healing Initiative website, and we can find the link and pop it in the chat for those who are interested. But we saw evidence for EEG coherence, that is, coherence between brains during meditation. And ours is just one of now many studies that have finally been published in this area that show when people come into collective practice together, our fields indeed can synchronize in measurable ways. And often people are looking at that. Of course, heart rate variability is one way, brain waves are another, and there are all these ways that will continue to come online as we start exploring this field between us, with real measurements that can be validated and replicated. So, for anyone who's interested in that kind of research, if you type in hyperscanning, don't ask me why they use that term, but hyperscanning is a term that's used in the scientific literature to look at these biofield connections, looking at physiological things that we know, like EEGs often, electroencephalograms. And by the way, we see hyperscanning not just in meditation, we see it in vocalizing together, including singing together, in cooperating on a task together. there are many different ways that we can actually induce a biofield of synchrony and connection between us by choosing to do so. And what I find, Rick, really fascinating about this when we talk about the field between us and bringing coherence to the planet, which is obviously something that we're all interested in at the moment. These studies go on to show that not only do our fields synchronize together when we come into collective practice, but that actually predicts better cooperation. So it's coming together with intention. It's co-creating something together with collective practice or a shared intention and a shared action. And then we see better cooperation when we do that. And this is really key, and I think a really wonderful place where biofield science can really bring to bear the hows of how it works, because as you said, we all feel it. We're getting a lot of questions. We're super excited to get to them. But before we do, we wanted to touch on one more layer of your work, and you alluded to it earlier, right?
Yeah.
Exploration of the biofield with respect to the earth and also of sacred sites. And, just really quickly, we actually published a study on something like this with that delegation in India. It's a published study that was conducted by our dear friend, the late Tiffany Barsodi, who led the study, where she demonstrated that the encounters with a sacred object at one of these ashrams actually seem to result in a measurable and statistically significant increase in stimulated biophoton emission per the GDV. So in other words, the light coming off of our bodies actually changed in response to contacting a sacred object in a sacred space. And you have been exploring sacred space in slightly different ways. I would love for you to tell us more about the research that you've done here.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's a fascinating topic because the idea is that all living things have biofields. Human beings have been studied. Holistic vets will do acupressure on animals, and they have maps of the energy pathways in the animals. Is the earth a living being? In indigenous traditions throughout the world, yes, she is a revered, conscious, spiritual dynamo. In the West, we're sort of gradually catching up by saying, well, ecology, this interacts with that, and you put all the pieces together. But there's something about the earth herself that has, let me see if I can get these. There's a couple of slides that will show the comparison between whoops, where's the enlargement? The comparison between the human biofield. Can people see that, or do I need to press share?
No, don't see it yet.
Uh, where's the share button?
Should be right at the bottom of your screen, share. Do you see it? You were sharing before it looked it
Oh,
actually
I don't see it now. So you don't see the.
no, but let me just make sure. Yeah, you're a co-host, so you should be able to share it.
Oh, this is the best slide.
Let me see if I can help you out here. Because I think you sent them to me, no?
No, I didn't. I probably should have.
Oh, well, no matter. Hover
Okay,
over the bottom of the screen, says Jason. Hover over the bottom of the screen.
I am, but there's not. There's just those buttons that go forward and backward and CC.
Oh, that's too bad.
Oh,
What
it is too bad. This is my.
on the Zoom screen, says Jason. Yes. Are you on the Zoom screen? Well,
Uh, ah.
yeah. Or if you want to forward me or Jason the slides, Rick, that might work too.
Um, all right. Just
But
just
maybe you could, yeah.
wait, here it says share.
Well, and while Rick is doing that, there we go, Rick. Well, we see we're kind of seeing the top of your web browser.
Oh, this is frustrating. There's the...
Well, while Rick works on this, because I think you feel like this is something you really want to do. I know that you were really excited to show these photos. Let's take a moment together as a community while Rick is, so beautifully trying to set up for showing us some really gorgeous photos, and just take some collective breath together. Maybe exploring that edge of the biofield as we began with Rick's practice, where we had our hands like so. And now seeing if we want to extend that into noticing the breath and just noticing and meeting the breath where it is to begin with, wherever your breath is at the moment. And then seeing what it might feel like to deepen that breath in the body, placing the attention of the breath into the hips. If you're sitting, feel it in your sit bones. And noticing whether you can attend to the breath in the sit bones and the space between your hands. You can close your eyes if you like, to just tune into sensation, the presence of your body, and the energy that might be very palpable now between your hands, and see what it's like to notice this connection with the breath and the dynamic feeling between the hands. Tuning into the sensations here and whether they feel more static or dynamic. That is, do you feel things moving, or are they relatively the same in that space between your hands as you breathe into the hips, all the way down into the tailbone? As a place of meeting yourself in the field. And now that we have met ourselves a little bit more, exploring now, placing our attention, maybe even our hands themselves, on the heart center. And just breathing here for a moment.
As you're breathing, can you check to see whether the image is now shared?
It is.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for continuing the process, Shamini, and people can obviously keep doing the breathing and intending while they look at this picture of a map of southern England that looks, for all intents and purposes, like an acupuncture meridian. It's actually a map of some of the sacred sites in southern England, places that you may have heard of, like Glastonbury, Avebury, Cadbury Castle, places like that. They're all in a line that initially was thought to be just a convenience for hikers, and the ancients built things just for ease. But now the energetic connecting them has been mapped out. This is a map that was developed through dowsing as another way of sensing subtle energies. And it's part of what's called ley lines, which is another word for the acupuncture meridians that connect sacred sites in Earth. This is a picture from one of the stone circles. It's not Stonehenge. It's one that you're allowed to walk on. It's called Avebury. And it's a magical place to be in anyway. But over the last 30 years, some very unusual phenomena have sprung up right near some of these sites, like Stonehenge and Avebury. This will be some aerial views of the wheat fields right adjacent to it. So the top part is you can see the small black dots are the stones of Avebury, but below it is what appeared in a wheat field, a very magical creation, probably heard of as crop circles, that literally overnight they'll appear, sometimes even in the course of a day. This next is an overview of Stonehenge, which is not nearly as large as Avebury. The top part shows the familiar alignment of Stonehenge. But then in the course of 1 hour, one afternoon, a tourist flyover going in one direction, notice just a wheat field, and coming back an hour later, one of these ultralight vehicles, this incredibly complex logarithmic spiral pattern appeared. So it was within an hour, something happened. There weren't people working on it because, as you can see, there's traffic on the road, and they certainly would have been observed. So it's just raised a whole array of very puzzling questions about, who, what, why, when, where, how, and why do they keep happening around the sacred sites? That this part of southern England seems to be ripe, if you will, with these kind of phenomena. The wheat stalks are altered in a biological way, that they are bent but not broken. The original story was that these circles were generated by men pulling planks of wood across the field and tramping it down, but they can only make primitive lines and destroy the wheat in the process. This stalk here is actually fused in this shape, so that the flower part is horizontal to the earth, but you can't bend it. And something happened that it's as though it was like glass, that it melted, changed shape, and then fused in a new position. So something happens in these sacred sites that we don't have a good energetic explanation for. And just to show you how magical it is, this is one of the formations that we had a chance, my wife and I had a chance to see, that it's just three-dimensionally, beautifully, complexly, no one really has a clue for it. So let me just stop with those images to leave you with, because they raise so many questions for me. Not only just the biofield of the earth, that's a key thing, that there's some theories about why southern England they all happen, and that this is some channeled information that the crop circles happen there because the energetics of the planet is very coherent in that region due to the ley lines that have been maintained and supported over the millennia. And whatever the source of intelligence is that's directing this needs to have what this channeled source called a clean canvas on which to paint. That there has to be some energetic coherence in order for the geometric imprint to translate into physical form. It couldn't happen in Central Park in New York City because there's just too much energetic chaos. But there's something about Wiltshire in southern England that facilitates this. And as far as what the circles are, what the information is, the temptation is to analyze them and figure out the meaning. You can go, there's a website called Crop Circle Connector that has archives of these pictures, and it's mind-boggling. And one of the explanations is that that's the purpose, is to mind-boggle us, so that we put aside our concepts and just open to something much bigger that's happening at a global level. So there's the sense that these are energetic imprints to get the earth used to these higher frequencies as part of our whatever this transformation process is that we're going through. So the global consciousness field is impacted by these crop circles. They're attracted to particular regions in sacred sites where you could call them the earth chakras. And we're responding to it. It's an interaction, though. It's not just that they do it to us. We can attune to the earth and do biofield attunements between the human and the earth to help the earth, Gaia, in her evolution as well into whatever this next dimension is. So I could go on and on about the crop circles.
I love it. I mean, this is all very deeply rooted in indigenous wisdom traditions, modern traditions as well. From a scientific point of view, all claims that haven't been substantiated yet because we haven't been directing our science in this direction. So I appreciate everything you're saying because it's very much resonant with so many people's experiences and wisdom and observation over thousands of years. And yet, scientifically, these are all claims that we haven't really substantiated because we haven't really properly studied these things at all. And what strikes me from our time together, Rick, this today is that you've brought up at least three key areas for us to consider devoting some scientific resources to in the area of biofield science. And these are just ones of many. But these are the kinds of things that we are so excited to do together as a community to really explore this and explore the impact of these things. Like you mentioned, even the impact of what happens to us when we enter such a sacred site, right? So there's so much to explore here. Our connection with biofield and humans in the earth, vis-a-vis going to sacred sites, and even how do we create sacred sites within our homes? There's so much to explore here about how do we create sacred space for better coherence and better ability to receive information. So that's one key area. Another key area that we mentioned is the space between us, right? The space of being able to practice together, different kinds of practices. How might we measure that and how the space again might change between us when we practice together and how might we measure that? And then from the clinical point of view, exploring phantom limb pain as another really ripe area for investigation that we really haven't explored scientifically much at all yet. But yet, we have these experiences from patients and practitioners where people are working with people with phantom limb pain and exploring how they could actually ameliorate their suffering and learn something more about themselves beyond the physical with these approaches. And I'm so grateful for you to bring up these three key areas because they're all so important and to me point to all of the wonderful things that we will continue to do in the field. And now we only have 16 questions to get through in 8 minutes. So I apologize. We may not get through all of the questions, but I will try to pick a few that I feel like would resonate the most with the entire community. And so the first one that came up here from Shiden, how does mindfulness or meditation help to sense the energy field? So I could answer that, but Rick would prefer, of course, for you as our guest to answer that.
Yeah, I think my experience was is common to a lot of people. When you learn how to stop paying so much attention to your thoughts, you begin to tune into other sensations. So the mental chatter dissipates with mindfulness, and you begin to be aware of some of the proprioceptive or uh, inner sensations, including energetics.
Yeah, and I would add to that, what we call mindfulness in the West is very much rooted in a tradition called Vipassana, or it's sometimes translated as insight meditation. And part of that practice, the first part of it is called Anapanasati, where you're just learning how to focus and have a focal point. So you focus on breathing through the nostrils. But then the rest of the practice is actually about going through the body. So in the West, John Kabat-Zinn called it body scan. But really, what the practice is you begin to be aware of subtle sensation going through the body, but you do so in a practice where you're not attached and you're not trying to fix anything and you're not trying to move energy or do anything like that. You're simply observing, but you are observing subtle sensation. So there is a deep link. And then mantra is another way that we contact subtle sensation through sound making, both inner sound making, where we might not utter the word, but we feel the vibration of the mantra, or outer sound making, where we chant. And there's a definite vibrational effect to that. So there was always in many traditions these links between the subtle energy perception and subtle energy science and these contemplative traditions. So great question, and thank you for helping us draw those links between meditation and biofield.
Yeah, one more follow up on that. Very nice summary. Appreciate that, Shamini. There are many meditation centers within a few miles of where I live in Western Massachusetts, because I think it actually is another one of these convergence of ley lines that we have from all the different Tibetan traditions, even uh, feminism came into flourish here in Western Massachusetts. So there's a Gaia Matrix is a book with a map of the ley lines of North America, and it all converges on Shelburne Falls, believe it or not. So it
Oh,
attracts a certain kind of person here.
that's beautiful. Yes. Yes. Back to sacred spaces and the spaces that we gravitate to. A beautiful scientific question, which I love, and I'll just give a shout out to. Is it possible to look at salamander limb regeneration or any other creatures who can already regenerate as a model? I think is what they're saying of the biofield science model. Certainly, we know of our dear colleague Mike Levin, who's doing really wonderful work with regeneration, and so what he's doing is he's not actually using biofield to do it, but he is measuring how he can manipulate electrical currents across cell membranes. Now, he does that chemically. So he's actually manipulating it, not from a biofield standpoint, but the cause of it is to create a difference in the electrical circuitry between the cell membranes. And when he changes the electric circuitry between the cell membranes, he is able to regenerate limbs and has looked at salamanders, planaria, lots of different models for that. So spot on. And for that person who asked the question, look up Mike Levin at Tufts University. You will really enjoy his work. He has a
Yeah,
wonderful TED Talk as well.
absolutely. But with one caveat, he does not believe in these external energy fields that organize the biologic processes. He calls the process self-organizing behavior, that somehow or other there's an inner wisdom that allows the cells to line up. I've had some dialogue with him because our clinic was just down the road from him for many years. And he hasn't yet made the leap into biofields and subtle energies.
Yeah, deeper conversation. His mother, I think, was actually a healer. Um,
Ah, yeah.
Ellen asks, do you think that entrainment happens through the biofield if the individual is in some way open, either through curiosity or some other way to resonate the frequency? So, in other words, is the sense of openness important for entrainment? Great question.
It's important, but it's actually not essential. If you enter into a big enough, powerful enough field and have your skeptical mindset, you can still be swept away by whatever it is, especially if the emotions are strong and more overtly expressed. But I do think it is through a biofield type of resonance, which is why I would love to see that heart math group entrainment demo replicated with isolating what the key factors are. Is it a magnetic field? Is it electrical field? Is it something non-local? Is it, parapsychological through telepathic connections? I mean, these are all possibilities that haven't yet been ruled out.
Mm, yes, lots of things to explore. And final questions that I'm going to wrap into kind of one. And Rick would love your opinion. Well, I have to be honest. Okay, guys, we are at 2 minutes before the hour. So I hate to pause the questions, but I want to make sure Rick has a chance to tell us how we can find him and where we can connect with you, where we can learn more about your book. I think Jason has just put a link to the book in the chat. And I really want to thank you. I mean, it's wonderful sometimes to feel the time pressure of like, oh, wait, there's so much more to talk about because there's so much more to explore here. And we're
Yeah.
excited to continue to bring this field forward, the science of it and the relevance of it for human evolution
Yeah.
um, currently. But where can we learn more about you and your work?
Well, the book's website is really has a lot of resources in terms of videos and links to articles and photographs. The book is pretty good. I would recommend that too. And I do put out a blog every few weeks, so you can sign up for that on the website as well, where one of the tabs is for blogs, because there's so many different applications of this. Once you're attuned to the aspect of life energy, it shows up everywhere, and it's sort of weird in a way that it's been overlooked for so long by Western science and Western civilization. But I think that's part of what this whole transition now is all about.
Indeed. Yeah, we're waking up to all aspects of our humanity, including the subtle ones and the fields between us.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, everybody, for joining. You'll get a link to this replay so that you can share it with others. And again, for those of you who feel called and heartened to support this humble nonprofit to continue to bring more wisdom to you, we hope that you will join us as a Chi contributor where you can dive into this wisdom on the daily. There's so much here in terms of the wisdom of our community, including you. So thank you so much for being here and wishing you all a beautiful weekend. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your work and Jason's